During family game night, my fiancée's dad asked why she was settling for me. She smiled and said, because no one else would marry him. I just put down my cards. A month later, they were asking if I'd talk to her again. The game was Monopoly, which was ironic considering I was about to lose everything I thought I was building. We were at my fiancée Jenna's parents' house for their weekly family game night. It was a mandatory event, a cornerstone of their perfect family image. I was sitting between Jenna and her father, Robert, a man who wore his disappointment in me like a well-tailored suit. Jenna's best friend, Madison, was there too, practically a family member. She and Jenna were giggling about something on their phones, while Robert was counting his fake money with the seriousness of a Wall Street banker. He landed on my property, Boardwalk, with a hotel on it. I told him he owed me $2,000. He sighed dramatically, peeling off the colorful bills. Then he looked across the board at his daughter, my fiancée. "Jenna, I just don't get it," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Look at this guy. He's a decent earner, I'll give him that. But he has no style, no pedigree. Why are you settling for him?" The air in the room went still. It wasn't the first time he'd made a comment like this, but it was by far the most direct. I felt a familiar tightening in my gut, the one I'd learned to ignore. I looked at Jenna, expecting her to defend me, to shut her father down. Instead, a slow, coy smile spread across her face. She reached over and patted my hand, looking right at her dad. "Because no one else would marry him," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Someone has to take care of him." Madison burst out laughing, a shrill, ugly sound. Jenna's mother gave a little titter of amusement. And Robert just smirked, a satisfied, "I told you so" look on his face. They all saw it as a joke. A funny little jab at the quiet, unassuming guy they had all grown to tolerate. I didn't say a word. I looked down at the cards in my hand, at the little plastic hotel on Boardwalk. I felt no anger, no sadness. It was the kind of clarity you get when a complex equation finally solves itself. For 3 years I had been running a cost-benefit analysis on this relationship, and her words were the final, definitive data point. The investment had soured. The risk now far outweighed the potential reward. I calmly placed my cards face down on the board. "I think I'm done playing for tonight," I said, my voice even. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and got a glass of water. Through the doorway I could hear them resuming their game, my absence barely registering. They thought I was pouting. They had no idea I was liquidating my assets. Let me explain. I'm not a simp, I'm a private equity investor. My entire career is built on a single skill: identifying undervalued or mismanaged assets, acquiring a controlling interest, optimizing their operations, and then selling them for a massive profit. I analyze systems, I find weaknesses, and I execute long-term strategies. 3 years ago, I applied that same skill set to my personal life. I met Jenna at a charity gala. She was beautiful, charming, and came from a family with a legacy business, a regional manufacturing company called Sterling Industries. Her father, Robert, had inherited it from his father, and it was the source of all their wealth and social standing. After a few dates, she invited me to her parents' house for dinner. Robert spent the entire evening talking about his company. But the more he talked, the more I realized he was a terrible businessman. He was coasting on his father's reputation, making sentimental decisions instead of smart ones, and was completely blind to the changing market. I did a deep dive. I spent a week of my own time analyzing Sterling Industries from the outside. The company was an absolute diamond in the rough. It had a solid product line and a loyal customer base, but it was being horribly mismanaged. Outdated technology, inefficient supply chains, a bloated management structure. It was bleeding money, but its core assets were incredibly valuable. With the right leadership, it could be turned around and sold to a national competitor for a fortune. So I formulated a 5-year plan. Step 1, acquire the key asset, which was Jenna. Step 2, integrate into the family structure. Step 3, gain Robert's trust and a seat on the company's board. Step 4, execute a complete operational overhaul. Step 5, facilitate a strategic acquisition by a larger firm, making myself and the family incredibly wealthy and securing my future. Jenna was the entry point. The relationship was my cost of acquisition, I knew from the beginning that she and her family were shallow and materialistic. I tolerated the constant, subtle digs about my background because I grew up in a working-class family. I tolerated Robert's condescending attitude. I tolerated Madison's snarky comments and her role as Jenna's enabling, parasitic sidekick. I paid for the lavish dinners, the surprise designer gifts, the weekend getaways. I played the part of the devoted, slightly out-of-his-league fiancé. It was all a calculated business expense, an investment in a much larger prize. But her comment during that game night changed the entire equation. It was a public declaration that she saw me not as a partner, but as a charity case. It revealed that she had no respect for me, which meant I would never gain the influence needed to execute my plan. The core asset was flawed. The deal was dead. And when a deal goes bad, you don't just walk away. You mitigate your losses and, if necessary, you initiate a hostile takeover of the competition. They saw me as a pawn in their game. They were about to find out I was the one who owned the entire board. Update 1. The week after the game night was a study in strategic silence. I didn't mention the incident. I was perfectly pleasant, but I was distant. I created a space between us, a professional buffer. When Jenna asked what was wrong, I just told her I was preoccupied with a complex new deal at work. This was, of course, true. The deal was the complete and total dismantling of her family's world. They interpreted my quietness as weakness. I overheard Jenna on the phone with Madison, saying I was in one of my moods and that she'd have to cheer me up with a shopping trip. They thought I was a simple machine that could be placated with shiny objects. This arrogance was their greatest vulnerability, and I was going to exploit it to its fullest extent. My first move was to secure my own position. Jenna and I lived in a condo that I owned outright. She had moved in 2 years ago. I spent a Saturday while she was out with Madison creating a complete photographic and itemized inventory of every single possession in that condo. I documented what was mine, what was hers, and what was jointly acquired. Then I met with a lawyer, a man who specialized in high-conflict divorces and corporate litigation. He reviewed my documentation and the prenuptial agreement I had insisted on, which Jenna had laughed at but signed. The prenup was ironclad. It protected all my pre-existing assets, including my condo and my investment portfolio. Our engagement was, legally speaking, a very clean break. Next, I turned my attention to Sterling Industries. For the past year, I had been discreetly gathering internal data on the company. Robert, in his infinite arrogance, had often asked me to look over financial reports, seeking my praise for his supposed business genius. I had saved every one of them. I knew their suppliers, their clients, their debt structure, and their operational weak points better than he did. Now it was time to use that information. Sterling's biggest weakness was its reliance on a single, primary supplier for a critical raw material. Let's call them Apex Materials. Robert had a long-standing relationship with Apex's owner, but it was a relationship built on golf games and expensive lunches, not sound business practices. I knew from my research that Apex was being squeezed by rising costs and was looking for new, more reliable partners. I leveraged my own network. I arranged a meeting with the CEO of Apex. I didn't mention Sterling Industries. Instead, I presented him with a deal on behalf of a different company in my portfolio. I offered him a long-term contract with a 10% price increase over what Sterling was paying, guaranteed order volumes for 3 years, and payment terms that were twice as favorable. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. He signed the contract, giving Sterling the standard 60-day notice that their supply agreement was being terminated. Robert wouldn't know it yet, but the heart of his company had just been ripped out. The second pillar of Sterling was their largest client, a national retail chain that accounted for nearly 40% of their annual revenue. I knew from the reports Robert had shown me that Sterling was frequently late on deliveries and that their quality control had been slipping for years. The client was unhappy, but they stayed because finding a new manufacturer was a hassle. I decided to make it less of a hassle for them. I put together an anonymous but very detailed dossier. It contained Sterling's late delivery statistics, data on their rising product defect rates, and a financial analysis showing their precarious cash flow situation. I sent this package via a secure courier to the head of procurement at the retail chain. I also included a list of 3 alternative, more reliable manufacturers, all companies I had a small silent stake in. I wasn't just sinking Sterling's ship, I was redirecting their lifeboats to my own ports. While these pieces were moving on the corporate chessboard, I handled my personal life. I found a new, larger condo and signed the lease. I scheduled movers for a date 3 weeks after the game night, a day when I knew Jenna and Madison were scheduled to attend an all-day influencer brunch. The final piece of the puzzle was our upcoming wedding. We were just 4 months away. Deposits had been paid, venues booked, a caterer selected. The biggest expense was the venue, a historic hotel ballroom that cost a fortune. I had put down the $50,000 non-refundable deposit from a joint account we had opened for wedding expenses. I called the hotel's event coordinator. I told her that due to unforeseen circumstances, we had to cancel the wedding. She was sympathetic, but reminded me that the deposit was non-refundable. I understand completely, I told her. But I don't want to cancel the booking. I want to change the nature of the event. I told her to convert the booking from a wedding reception to a corporate awards gala for one of my companies. The date would remain the same. The budget would remain the same. The name on the contract, which was mine, would remain the same. Instead of the Jenna and Alex wedding, the event was now the Vanguard Capital Annual Achievement Gala. With all the traps set, I just had to wait. Jenna remained blissfully unaware. She was more concerned with picking out flower arrangements and arguing with Madison about what color the bridesmaids' dresses should be. One evening, she came home with a stack of wedding magazines. She tossed them on the coffee table and sighed. "It's all so much work," she said. "Sometimes I think you don't appreciate the effort I'm putting into planning our future." I just looked at her and nodded. "I'm sure it's very stressful," I said. The beautiful, oblivious architect of her own destruction. The pieces were all in place. The system was primed for collapse. Update 2. The first sign of trouble in paradise reached Robert about 10 days after my meeting with Apex Materials. I know this because Jenna came home one evening in a state of high anxiety. Apparently, her father had called her in a rage. Apex had sent the official termination letter. Robert, according to Jenna, was losing his mind. He couldn't understand why his old friend would betray him. He was blaming the economy, the government, everything but his own incompetence. "Dad is so stressed," Jenna said, pacing back and forth in the living room. "He said this could be a huge problem for the company. You work in finance. Can you believe this? After 30 years of loyalty." I made some sympathetic noises and told her that business was tough. Inside, I felt the cold satisfaction of a plan unfolding perfectly. Losing Apex meant Sterling's production would grind to a halt in 60 days unless they found a new supplier, which would be nearly impossible at a competitive price on such short notice. A week later, the second bomb dropped. Their biggest client sent a letter, placing their massive account under formal review, due to persistent concerns about supply chain reliability and quality control. The letter cited specific data points that I knew came directly from the dossier I had sent. This time, the panic was real. Robert called a family emergency meeting, and he insisted I be there. I think he genuinely believed my big-shot investor brain could magically fix the problems he had created over decades of mismanagement. The atmosphere at their house was funereal. Robert looked 10 years older. Jenna and her mother were hovering around him, wringing their hands. Robert laid out the situation, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "It's a coordinated attack," he declared. "Someone is trying to destroy me." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Alex, you understand this world. What do I do?" This was the moment I had been waiting for. I put on my professional face, the one I use in boardrooms. "Robert," I said calmly, "from what you've shown me, the company is facing a catastrophic failure of its core operational pillars. You've lost your primary supplier, and you're about to lose your primary client. Your cash flow is already negative. Frankly, the situation is critical." I spent the next hour walking him through his options, all of which were terrible. He could try to find a new supplier, but it would cost a fortune and take months. He could try to appease the client, but he had no leverage. He needed a massive infusion of capital to modernize his equipment and fix his logistics, but no bank would give him a loan in his current state. Then I laid my own trap. "There is one other option," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "You could seek a private investor, someone who could provide the capital and expertise to turn things around. It would mean giving up a controlling interest in the company, but it would be better than bankruptcy." A flicker of hope appeared in Robert's eyes. "Do you know someone?" he asked. "I might," I said. "Let me make some calls." Of course, the investor I had in mind was me. Not directly, but through a shell corporation I controlled. My plan was never just to destroy them, it was to pick up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. While the business drama was unfolding, my personal exit plan was proceeding on schedule. The Saturday of the influencer brunch arrived. Jenna and Madison left early in the morning, dressed in absurdly expensive outfits, chattering about mimosas and networking. The moment they were gone, my movers arrived. The process was clinical. In 4 hours, every single thing I owned was packed and loaded. I left Jenna's possessions untouched, exactly as they were. But the absence of my things created a stark, hollow feeling in the condo. I left my keys, along with a printed copy of our prenup and a cashier's check for half the value of our shared wedding account on the kitchen island. I also left a 1-page letter. "Jenna, our engagement is over. As you can see, I have moved out. Per our prenuptial agreement, our individual assets remain separate. The enclosed check represents your half of the wedding fund. All other deposits and bookings were made in my name and are now my sole property. Any further communication should be directed to my lawyer. His information is below. Alex." I took one last look around, then left. I drove to my new condo and began unpacking. That evening, I got a string of furious texts from Jenna. She and Madison had come home to a half-empty apartment. She called me a monster, a coward, a thief. She accused me of abandoning her. Madison sent her own series of unhinged messages, threatening to expose me on social media. I read them, took screenshots for my lawyer, and then blocked them both permanently. The silence was golden. The next day, Robert called me, his voice a low growl. "What is this I hear about you leaving my daughter? You can't do this. We have a wedding to plan, and I need your help with the business." "Robert, the engagement is over," I said, my voice cold and final. "And as for the business, my offer to find an investor still stands, but it will be a purely professional arrangement. The price for saving your company will be a 51% ownership stake transferred to the investment group I represent. That is the only offer on the table. You have 48 hours to decide before the offer is withdrawn." I could hear him choking on his own rage on the other end of the line. He had no choice. It was either give up control or watch his father's legacy crumble into dust. The checkmate was in sight. Final update. It has been 3 months since I put my plan into motion. The aftermath was every bit as devastating for them as I designed it to be. Robert, backed into a corner with no other options, accepted my offer. He signed over 51% of Sterling Industries to a holding company, never knowing he was handing the keys to his kingdom directly to me. The day the deal closed, I walked into the Sterling Industries boardroom, introduced myself as the new majority owner, and fired him. I also fired his entire crony management team. The look on his face, a mixture of pure shock and dawning, horrified comprehension, was worth more than any amount of money. I immediately began implementing the turnaround plan I had designed years ago. We renegotiated a new temporary supply deal with Apex, ironically, at a much higher cost to the company, which I was happy to pay in the short term. I personally flew out to meet with the leadership of their big retail client. I showed them my comprehensive plan to fix the quality control and logistics issues, and I offered them a discount for 6 months as a show of good faith. They agreed to keep their account. The company, under my control, was saved. In a year, I expect it to be twice as profitable. In 2 years, I'll sell it for a 9-figure sum. The fallout in their personal lives was just as complete. Without my financial support, Jenna's world collapsed. She couldn't afford the rent on our old condo and was forced to move back in with her parents. Her father, stripped of his title and his company, had a complete breakdown. The big family house is now on the market to cover their massive debts. Jenna's social life imploded. Madison and her other friends were not interested in hanging out with someone who couldn't afford brunch. Their friendship was transactional, and the transaction was over. Madison tried to run a smear campaign against me online, but my lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter so aggressive that she deleted her entire account in a panic. About a month after I left, I started getting the calls. First from Jenna's mother, pleading with me to be reasonable, to take Robert back, to talk to Jenna. Then from Jenna herself, leaving long, tearful voicemails. She was sorry. She made a terrible mistake. She loved me. It was all just a joke. She didn't mean it. The usual script. They finally convinced a family friend to reach out to me, asking if I would just talk to her again. I agreed to one final meeting. We met at a neutral coffee shop. Jenna and Robert were there. They looked awful, defeated. Robert spoke first. He apologized. He said he was wrong, that he had misjudged me. He begged me to give him some kind of rollback at the company, even just as a consultant. Then Jenna spoke. She cried. She said she was lost without me. She asked if there was any chance we could start over. She said she would do anything. I let them finish. Then I took a sip of my coffee and looked them both in the eye. You seem to be under a misapprehension, I said. You think this was about my feelings being hurt. You think this is something an apology can fix. It's not. I turned to Robert. This was a business transaction. I saw a failing asset, and I planned to acquire it. Your disrespect simply proved you were an unreliable partner, so I switched from a friendly merger to a hostile takeover. You didn't lose your company because I was angry. You lost it because you were a bad CEO. Then I turned to Jenna. And you? You weren't my fiancée. You were my cost of acquisition. You were the price I was willing to pay to get access to the real prize. But your comment at that game night revealed a fundamental flaw in the asset. You had no value as a partner. You were a bad investment. So I cut my losses. I stood up from the table. The color had completely drained from their faces. They were staring at me as if I were a complete stranger, and in a way, I was. They had never actually seen me before, only the role I was playing. I hope you both learned from this, I said, leaving a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. Always know the true value of your assets, and never, ever underestimate your competition. I walked out and never looked back. The last I heard, Robert and his wife were moving into a small rental, and Jenna had gotten some low-level office job. They lost everything: their company, their house, their social standing. During our son's parent-teacher meeting, my wife joked, "He tries to help with homework, but honestly, he's dumber than the kids." The teacher laughed uncomfortably. I just smiled. A month later, she was explaining custody papers. There are moments that change your life. Most of them are big and loud, like a car crash or a wedding. Mine was quiet. It was the sound of my wife's condescending little laugh in a stuffy, overheated classroom, and it was the moment I knew my marriage was over. I just had to figure out how to blow it up without taking my son down with it. Let me give you the rundown. My name is Paul. I'm 42. My wife, Jessica, is 38. We've been married for 12 years. We have a 10-year-old son, Leo. I own a small business that does custom metal fabrication. I work with my hands. I build things that are strong and real. I'm not a fancy guy. I didn't go to some Ivy League school. Jessica did, and for 12 years, she has never, ever let me forget it. She's a corporate lawyer, smart, sharp, and absolutely ruthless. In the beginning, I thought our differences were a good thing. She was the brains, I was the brawn, a team. But over the years, that dynamic curdled. In her eyes, I wasn't her partner, I was her pet project. The simple, working-class husband she could trot out to show how grounded she was before making a joke at my expense to put me back in my place. The jokes were constant. At dinner parties, if I talked about a project I was proud of, she'd chime in with something like, "It's so cute how excited he gets about playing with his tools." In front of her family, she'd correct my grammar like I was a child. But the worst of it was what she was doing to our son. She was teaching Leo to see me the same way she did, as a lovable but ultimately incompetent fool. If he asked me for help with his math homework, she'd sigh dramatically and say, "Why don't you wait for me, honey? Daddy gets confused with the big numbers." I tried to fight it. We had a dozen screaming matches about it. Each one ended the same way, with me being accused of being insecure and oversensitive, and with her giving me the silent treatment for a week until I finally gave in, just for the sake of peace in the house. I was trapped. If I left, I was terrified she would use her money and her legal connections to take my son from me. So I stayed. I took the hits. I let her chip away at my dignity, piece by piece, because I couldn't bear the thought of losing my boy. Then came the parent-teacher meeting last month. Leo was struggling a bit in science. Nothing major, just having a hard time with some of the concepts. We were all sitting at a tiny table in his classroom, me, Jessica, and his teacher, a kind but flustered woman named Mrs. Davison. Mrs. Davison was explaining a new project. "We're encouraging the parents to get involved to help the kids build their models at home," she said. Jessica let out a little, tinkling laugh. "Well, I'll be handling that, of course," she said, patting my arm in that fake, placating way of hers. Then she looked at Mrs. Davison, leaned in as if sharing a hilarious secret, and said the words that ended my marriage. "He tries to help with homework, but honestly, he's dumber than the kids." Mrs. Davison's professional smile froze on her face. She let out a short, deeply uncomfortable laugh and quickly looked down at her papers. But I saw it all. The pity in her eyes, the public confirmation of my status as the family idiot, and it wasn't just about me. It was about my son. In that room, in front of the person responsible for his education, my wife had declared me an unfit father. I didn't react. I didn't get angry. I just smiled. A quiet, tight smile. I sat through the rest of that meeting, nodding in all the right places, but my mind was a million miles away. The part of me that had been scared, the part that had been willing to endure anything to keep the peace, just died. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just going to leave her anymore. I was going to take my son with me, and I was going to use her own arrogance and cruelty to do it. The war had begun. She just didn't know it yet. Update 1. The month after that parent-teacher meeting was the most difficult and most important of my life. I was living a double life. On the surface, I was the same old Paul, the dutiful husband, the slightly dumb dad. I let her jokes and insults slide off me. I didn't start any fights. I gave her no reason to suspect that anything had changed. But behind the scenes, I was a man preparing for war. My objective was simple: to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I was the better parent and that her influence was toxic to our son. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best, most aggressive family law attorney in the city. A guy named Marcus Thorne. He was expensive, but I sold off some old equipment and drained my personal savings to pay his retainer. In our first meeting, I laid everything out. I told him about Jessica's constant belittling, the jokes, the way she undermined me with our son. I told him about the parent-teacher meeting. He was blunt. "Judges hate it when one parent alienates the other," he said. "But you need more than just stories. You need proof. Hard, undeniable proof." So I became a spy in my own home. I bought a few small, voice-activated audio recorders. I put one in the kitchen, one in the living room, and one in Leo's playroom. It felt slimy, but Marcus had assured me it was legal in our state as long as I was a party to the conversation, and the recordings were made in my own home. The evidence I gathered was sickening and utterly damning. I captured dozens of instances of her cruelty. A recording from the kitchen. Leo asks me about a historical event, the project. I start to explain it. Jessica cuts me off. "Leo, honey, don't listen to him. He probably thinks the dinosaurs are still alive. Let's look it up on a real website after your dad is done helping." A recording from the living room. We're watching a documentary. I make a comment about a scientific principle. She laughs. "Did you learn that from one of your tool catalogs, Paul? It's cute that you try." The worst was a conversation I recorded between her and her sister on the phone. She had put it on speaker, thinking I was out in the garage. "I don't know how much longer I can take it," she sighed. "It's like having 2 children. I swear, Leo is already smarter than he is. My only hope is that the kid inherited my genes." While I was gathering this arsenal of evidence, I launched the second phase of my plan, Operation Superdad. I completely took over everything related to Leo's schooling and extracurriculars. I made it my mission to help him with his science project, the very thing she had mocked me over. The project was to build a model of the solar system. Jessica wanted to buy one of those expensive, pre-made kits. I had a better idea. I took Leo to my workshop. For the next 3 weekends, we built a solar system from scratch. We used scrap metal, ball bearings, and a small motor. We welded, we painted. We figured out the gear ratios to make the planets actually orbit the sun at different speeds. Leo was completely captivated. He was learning about mechanics, about engineering, about how to create something real with his own hands. He was seeing his dumb dad in a whole new light. The day he took that project to school, he was beaming. He got the highest grade in the class. Mrs. Davison sent me a personal email telling me it was the most impressive project she had seen in her 15 years of teaching. I saved that email. It was Exhibit B. I also started documenting everything. I created a detailed log, every insult from Jessica, with the date, time, and a corresponding audio file. Every hour I spent helping Leo with his homework. Every school event I attended, and every one she skipped because she had a work emergency. I was building a case, piece by methodical piece. The final piece of the puzzle was our finances. I knew she would use her money as a weapon. Marcus and I worked with a forensic accountant. We went through 12 years of bank records. We found that while I had been pouring my income into our joint accounts to pay for the mortgage, the bills, and Leo's expenses, she had been diverting a significant portion of her large salary into a private investment portfolio. A secret nest egg she had never told me about. She was preparing to leave me. And she was planning on taking as much of my money as she could, while protecting all of hers. After a month of this silent, intense preparation, I was ready. I had a mountain of evidence. I had a clear record of my parental involvement. I had a detailed picture of her financial deceit, and I had the custody papers, drafted by Marcus, that formally requested primary physical and legal custody of our son. I chose my moment carefully. It was a Friday night. She had just gotten home from work, bragging about some big case she had won. She was in a good mood, feeling powerful and superior. "That's great, honey," I said, my voice calm. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a large manila envelope. "Speaking of legal matters, I have something for you." I handed it to her. She took it, a confused smile on her face. She opened it and pulled out the papers. I watched as her smile slowly dissolved, replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending shock. "What is this?" she whispered. "Custody papers? Is this a joke?" "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "It's not a joke. It's a consequence. You have spent years treating me like an idiot. You have spent years trying to turn our son against me. You have publicly declared me to be dumber than the kids. Well, this idiot just spent the last month building a case against you that is going to ensure that our son is raised by the parent who actually respects him. You've been served, Jessica." Update 2. The explosion was everything I expected it to be, and more. For a woman who prided herself on her composure, Jessica lost it completely. The custody papers were a declaration of war she had never imagined I was capable of launching. She screamed, she cried, she threw a glass against the wall. She called me every name in the book. A monster, a snake, a manipulative loser who was trying to poison her son against her. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I didn't engage. I just stood there, a calm island in the middle of her hurricane of rage. When she finally wound down, sputtering and exhausted, I said one thing. "My lawyer's name is on the papers. Have your lawyer contact him. I'm taking Leo to my brother's house for the weekend. We'll be back on Sunday." Then I walked out, got my son, and left her standing in the wreckage of the life she thought she had under complete control. The next few weeks were a brutal, ugly slog through the legal trenches. She hired a team of expensive lawyers who came at me with everything they had. They tried to paint me as an unfit father. They claimed I was a simple-minded tradesman who couldn't provide the intellectually stimulating environment that a bright boy like Leo needed. They claimed I had a history of anger issues, citing our past arguments as proof. It was a good strategy. But I had a better one. I had the truth, and I had the receipts. In our first deposition, her lawyer tried to grill me about my education, my business, trying to make me sound like an uncultured moron. I just answered every question calmly and honestly. Then it was my lawyer's turn. Marcus started by asking her about the parent-teacher meeting. She tried to laugh it off, calling her comment a poorly timed joke. "A joke?" Marcus asked, his voice silky smooth. So, you find your husband's intelligence to be a laughing matter? Do you think it helps your son's development to hear his mother publicly mock his father's intelligence? She stammered, trying to backtrack. Then Marcus pulled out the first of my secret weapons. He played the audio recording of her phone call with her sister, the one where she said I was like her second child and that she hoped Leo had inherited her genes. Her face went completely white. Her lawyers started frantically shuffling papers. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus dismantled her. He played recording after recording, her telling Leo not to listen to me about his homework, her mocking me in front of friends. He presented the log I had kept, a month-long, detailed account of her campaign of parental alienation. He presented the email from Mrs. Davison, praising my involvement and the incredible science project Leo and I had built. He presented the photos of me and Leo at his baseball games, at the library, at the museum, all events she had been too busy to attend. The final blow was the financial discovery. When Marcus presented the evidence of her secret investment portfolio, her own lawyer looked at her with a flash of utter shock and betrayal. She had lied to him, just like she had lied to me. The smear campaign she tried to launch with her friends and family also backfired spectacularly. She told them I was trying to steal her son. I responded by sending a single, carefully selected audio clip to her parents and her sister, the one where she was talking about me on the phone, the one that was completely undeniable. Her sister called her in tears, and her parents, who had always been her biggest enablers, were suddenly very, very quiet. The custody battle that she thought she would win in a landslide was turning into a complete and utter rout. Final update. It's been 6 months since I served those papers. The divorce was finalized last week. As I write this, my son Leo is in the next room, asleep in his own bed, in our new house. Our house. We didn't even have to go to court for the final custody hearing. After the depositions, and after her own lawyers realized the mountain of evidence I had against her, they advised her to settle. They knew that if a judge heard those recordings, she wouldn't just lose. She would be annihilated. The settlement was a complete victory. I was granted primary physical and legal custody of our son. She gets him every other weekend and on alternating holidays. That's it. Her campaign to prove I was the incompetent parent had resulted in her being legally designated as the secondary one. The financial settlement was just as satisfying. Because of her documented financial deceit, the judge was not inclined to be generous. Her secret portfolio was rightfully deemed her separate property, but all of our shared assets were divided in my favor. I kept the house, which I then sold. She had to pay for her own expensive lawyers out of her own pocket. Her life, from what I've heard, has completely changed. Without me to pay the mortgage and manage the household, she had to sell her fancy car and move into a small condo. Without her son as a captive audience for her daily insults, she is reportedly very lonely. Her relationship with Leo is strained. He's a smart kid. He sees her for who she is now, not the perfect, all-knowing mother she pretended to be. He has started to push back against her condescension, using the confidence he has built with me over the last few months. I saw her once, at Leo's soccer game. She was on the other side of the field with a couple of her friends. She looked smaller, somehow. The arrogant, powerful lawyer was gone, replaced by a tired-looking woman who couldn't even get her own son to come and say hello to her after the game. The ultimate revenge wasn't about money or winning in court. It was about my son. I fought for him. I proved that a good father isn't defined by a college degree or a fancy job title. A good father is defined by his presence, his patience, and his respect. I taught my son that it's not okay for anyone, not even his mother, to treat people with cruelty and contempt. Last week, we had the first parent-teacher meeting of the new school year. It was just me and Mrs. Davison. She told me that Leo is excelling in all his subjects, especially science. She said he's more confident, more engaged. "You've done a wonderful job with him, Mr. Jensen," she told me. I just smiled. And this time, it was a real one. The woman who called me dumber than a 10-year-old is now explaining to her friends why she only gets to see her own son 4 days a month. I didn't have to prove I was smart. I just had to prove I was a father. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.